This week, we want to talk about the concept of man being material and immaterial. Now, that's a very important concept for biblical counseling because the nature of man is central to the biblical counseling process. If you believe that man is just body and brain, then you will reduce everything to man to being brain chemicals and chemical imbalances, and you'll try to focus on giving man a pill for behaviors that the Bible shows that it's an issue of the heart. And so as we walk through this, we want to just make some distinctions between man being material and immaterial and begin to see that the source of man's problems doesn't come from his body and brain, but it comes from his immaterial heart. So let me just kind of summarize before we go through the details. Here's the big picture. Since man is material and immaterial, man uses the word heart, soul, and spirit. That's what we see in the scriptures. And those words are used to describe various intricate details of the immaterial aspect of man. So when you see the word heart, when you see the word soul, when you see the word spirit, it's talking about some aspect of the mind, the will, or the affections. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the immaterial part of man. When we talk about the body, we're talking about the physiological, that which you can see, the brain and the eyes and the nose and the ears. And so they are distinct, but they're intertwined as man is here on earth. But the reality is, man is not limited to his body and brain because we know from Scripture that when you die, you still operate in your process of thinking, you still operate in your process of remembering and speaking and things of that nature. And so man is not limited to his physical body. He functions in his physical body while he's here on earth. But understanding that exposes something to us. Man's immaterial side is what's driving him, not his body and brain. So when there is a problem with bad behavior, what the Bible defines as sin, this behavior is not coming from the body and brain. This behavior is coming from the heart. Now, with that being said, let's just kind of do some background here and just kind of go step by step over this in a big picture form. As created in the image of God, man until death is an inseparable unity of material body and brain and the immaterial heart, soul, or spirit. So, in essence, we have been designed with a mind, and the mind is immaterial. You cannot see it, and that involves our thoughts, it involves our beliefs, our understanding, our memory, our judgment, our imaginations, our discernment, and the conscience. So we have a mind. You can't see it, but it exists. Secondly, we have been designed with affections, which involves our longings or our desires or our feelings. So when we talk about wanting or desiring or having emotions, that has to do with our affections. Third, we have been designed with a will, which involves our ability to choose and determine action. So when the Bible says, choose this day who you will serve, and we see things where we have to make decisions, it is not the body that's making the decision, it's the immaterial will, and the body is responding to the immaterial will of us. And so as we see, again, we have a mind, we have affections, we have a will. Now, when we look at the scripture, our mind, affections, and will are the sum total of what we call the immaterial part of man, the non-physical, that which you cannot see. And the Bible generally uses three words to talk about the non-physical part of man. It uses the word soul, it uses the word spirit, it uses the word heart. And this again is used to talk about the immaterial part of man. Now, sometimes the word soul is used to talk about the totality of man, as in saving man's soul or saving a soul. But generally, when you see the word heart, you see the word soul, you see the word spirit, it's referring to some immaterial aspect of man. Now, we have been designed with the physical body, which is the home of the immaterial part of us. Now, if you think about this, just kind of in general, when you get in a car, the car is what you use to function. The car is not driving you, you're driving the car. And so if you think about it from that standpoint, the body is like a car. It's what we use while we're here on earth to operate. The car doesn't drive us, we drive the car. Hence, the body doesn't drive us, we drive the body. And so as we function on earth, we use the body and brain as a means to operate as God has commanded. And when we don't operate as God commanded, we discover that there's some things that happen to us, not only in the immaterial side, but the physical side. So in essence, we have been designed with the physical body, which is the home of the immaterial part of us while we're here on earth. Now, the physical body and the immaterial part of man are an inseparable union while man is alive on earth. In other words, as long as you are alive, you are connected to this physical body. Now, in essence, we have an eternal being that will live forever, either in fellowship with God or in eternal damnation. What does that mean? You and I are going to live forever. We may not be in these bodies physically forever, but we're going to live forever. And what's going to live forever? The immaterial aspect of us. So this physical part that you see is just what we use to function while we're on earth. But when we die, we will depart from this physical aspect and will be connected to God because we are a living, breathing soul, if you will. Now, here's the thing that we have to understand. We are accountable to God for our thoughts and our words and our deeds, and we have to think about that, and we have to pull those things together. But in understanding our accountability for our thoughts and words and deeds, we've got to distinguish some things. We are body and soul, if you will, or we are body and heart, or we are body and spirit. Any way you want to make that division. But in understanding that, the real us is inside this physical body. And so as we understand that the real us is inside this physical body, we are not confined to this material body. We learn this and we say, okay, so what does that mean? What is that important for us? It just means that while we're here on earth, we interface with this material brain and body in the area of thought. And that's important because, again, we have thought processes that are going on in us, but it operates in the immaterial mind, and we also use the physical brain as a process. Now, giving all of this, why is this important for you and I? Because when we start to talk about bad behavior, when we start to talk about sin and people say, I have a chemical imbalance, and because I have this chemical imbalance, I'm choosing this particular decision. Well, here's what you can begin to say. A chemical imbalance is a physiological thing that, again, has been talked about in many, many areas, but a chemical imbalance cannot determine bad behavior. You say, well, wait a minute, how can you say that? Well, again, if sin is a condition of the heart is immaterial. The body and brain is an instrument that we use. It doesn't determine our choice to sin or not to sin. So let me share this with you just in big picture, and you've been reading this hopefully in your workbook or in your book. Man's material body and brain may limit or expand his ability to think or experience things here on earth, but the body and brain do not determine those thoughts, words, or actions which man is responsible before God to choose in his immaterial heart. Some of us have great intellect. Some of us have small intellect. Some of us are retarded, but these issues do not affect the processes of the immaterial heart. Sin is not caused by the brain or brain chemicals, but by the thought processes of the immaterial heart. Therefore, if there's an issue of sin in our lives, we must blame the immaterial heart, not the material body and brain. Medicine may deal with the symptoms of the problem, but not the root issues. Now, let's break all that down. Here's what we're simply saying. If there is a problem with sin in your life, it's not because of the body or physiological issues. If there's a problem with sin in your life, bad behavior, things going on where you are down or depressed or downcasted, those are not conditions of the body, those are issues of the heart. And as you study your scriptures, you're going to look at Matthew, and I want you to really explore Matthew chapter 15, where Jesus makes a distinction between the physical and the immaterial. And he says what defiles the man is not what comes from his body, but what defiles the man is what comes from his immaterial heart. And then he begins to talk about evil thoughts and fornications and all those things that come from the heart of man. And what's interesting, even in the book of Proverbs, it says foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, not the brain of the child. So what we are understanding just with basic nature of man, biblical anthropology, is that many of the issues that we try to associate with the physiological aspects of man are really coming from the immaterial heart of man. As a biblical counselor, as we get into counseling, if we can't distinguish those things, we will call something that's a sin sickness. And when you call sin sickness, you try to deal with it through the medical model, not the biblical model. And without having a proper understanding of the nature of man, you will find yourself doing that constantly. And so it's important that we see if it's a sin issue, if it's of the emotions, that is not a physiological issue, that is an immaterial one. Well, let me just kind of summarize some other things as we build on this premise about what we can and cannot control. Knowing these things and knowing these matters about the material and immaterial aspect of man helps you to operate knowing that you can't blame the body for that which is a condition of the heart. So someone says, well, I have a chemical imbalance. That's why I was mean to you the other day. You can say, you may have a physical chemical imbalance, but you being mean to me is an issue of the heart, not the issue of the brain. You may be using that as an excuse, but your brain and body does not determine how you operate. You say, well, can you kind of give me a little Bible? Sure. Romans chapter 6. It says, do not let sin reign in your mortal bodies. In Romans chapter 6, it also talks about that the body can be used as an instrument, and not to use it for instruments of evil, but to use it as an instrument of righteousness. So now I need you to think about that. The body in the context is the physical body and brain. It is the instrument that we use on earth. So the instrument can't determine the choice. The instrument carries out the choice. So I can't say because the instrument is having a problem, that's the reason why I'm being a bad person. No, you're being a bad person because it's an issue of the heart, not the body and brain. So as we pull that together and we talk about what we can and cannot control, we start to see a big picture here. And I want to break it down. I'm thinking something right now. Can you control what I'm thinking? I desire something right now. Can you control what I desire? I want to do something right now. Can you control my wanting to do something? None of those things are under your control. Can you determine if it's going to be light or dark outside, if it's going to rain or not rain? None of those things are under your responsibility or my responsibility. I can't control what you think. I can't control what you say. I can't control what you will to have happen. I can't control your desires or your emotions, and you can't control that about me. So what does that mean? When something happens between you and I say something like, you made me mad, that's not a true statement because you can't control what I think, you can't control what I desire, you can't control what I will to happen, and I can't control that about you. So that's important because what that means is at the core of our soul, it's our motives that determine our choices, not people and circumstances. And so if my motives determine my choices, there's only two basic motives. I'm either being self-serving or God-honoring. And every decision I make is revealing if I'm being self-serving or God-honoring. And guess what? I determine that. You don't. So at the end of the day, we have to really, in the biblical counseling arena, begin to explore what we can and cannot control so that we have a clear issue of identifying and specifically saying, here is where your problems exist. Yes, your parents may have been terrible parents or your friends may have been terrible to you. You could not control their choices. But you could control how you chose to have bitterness in your heart or how you chose to show love to them or how you chose to handle it or choose to handle it, if you will. You determine that. So therefore, the condition of your soul cannot be blamed on people and circumstances. The condition of your soul always comes back to your choice. So let me give you some basic realities that we want to close out with. Man is not necessarily responsible to God for what happens to him. Secondly, man is not necessarily responsible to God for pleasure or pain, meaning this: pleasure or pain, feelings are not necessarily something that you are held accountable to God for, meaning is right or wrong. You'll be held accountable to God for how you had those experiences. For instance, if you feel a certain way, the feelings are not what you're going to be held accountable for. It's the thoughts that produce the feelings that you'll be held accountable for. For instance, Job was not responsible for sorrow. God didn't hold him hostage or say he was sinful for sorrow. Job was not responsible for grief or pain or grieving. He was not responsible for grief or distress. But he was responsible for how he chose to handle his difficult situations. The emotions he was experiencing was coming from the thoughts he was having, and as long as his thoughts were not evil thoughts, he was not held accountable as far as it being wrong, if you will. But he is responsible for how he chooses to handle the situations around him. So, for instance, man is not responsible to God for the temptations he experienced. Now, what do I mean by that? Satan can present things to you. You can't control Satan presenting opportunities. You only control the choice. Man is responsible to God for those areas where God says, don't think this way, don't say this or say that, do this or don't do that. He is responsible in those areas, and as we are learning this process, we must help people to see this. For instance, Job was responsible for worship and not sinning against God. He was responsible for not cursing God, for correcting the situation, for yielding to God, for repenting. He was responsible for evil thoughts or being critical or having anger or complaining or arguing with God or blaming God or rebellion or rebuking God or trying to correct God. He was responsible, but for having sadness in the soul, that's not a sin. It's neutral. So we've got to learn, as we see the nature of man, what man is responsible for and not responsible for. So in the counseling arena, we're not beating people over the head because they feel a certain way. And we don't say you shouldn't feel that way. We're going to ask a simple question. Tell me why you're feeling that way. Because we know something. Feelings are the result of thinking. And so he's not held accountable for what he's feeling. He's held accountable for the thoughts that produced the feelings. So here's the key point I want us to think about in closing. Man and animals are entirely different in this regard. Animals are not created in the image of God and are not personally responsible to God for their choices, their thoughts and actions, but they're determined by their instincts, environment, genetics, bodily urges, brain chemicals, present body conditions, training, and past experiences. Man, on the other hand, is responsible to God not to allow the above things to determine the choices he makes regarding the thoughts, words, and actions for which he's personally responsible to God. That is, man's predispositions are not to determine the reactions of his immaterial heart. We are predisposed, but not predetermined. What that means is there may be some potential things that you can do, but it doesn't mean you have to do them. So this concludes our first section. I encourage you to go back, read the material, keep focusing in, make sure you understand the difference between material and immaterial and all the implications that come with this. God bless you.